Massimo, thank you so much for being with us here on Trauma Undone. I am very excited to speak with you and to hear all about your story and your journey. But for those, so many people know you and love you and get to experience you. But for those who don't, how would you best describe yourself?
Ooh, that's an interesting way to start off this interview. Well, if someone's just meeting me, I think you can already tell that I'm a fun-loving, happy person to be around. So that's definite. But I am a pretty complex individual that likes and enjoys everything about life. And I strive to find greatness in everyone around me and to bring out those qualities. That's what really gets me up in the morning.
And you get to do that every day.
I do. It's wonderful. It took me a long time to get here, but boy, I'm happy to be doing it.
So I want to touch a little bit on your journey, because not only is the show about, giving people the opportunity to discover ways that they are able to heal themselves, but I also feel like it's so important that so often, actually all except one so far of my guests have got to where they are and serve in such a beautiful way because they've had some experience in their past. So I think that that's just a shining example for people to see that it is possible. So I want to talk a little bit about where your journey started and how you have transformed. Let's just start with where your journey started, because it's a bigger question. Yeah.
What's interesting about the answer to that question, and first, I want to just say that what you just said about coming out on the other side, I think that the greatest of those among us have that trauma, that little extra edge that provides us that space to be able to really see what greatness can be. And then once we find it, it makes it much easier to share and want to bring that out in others. So my story is one that I didn't really know where the trauma came from until much later in life. It took sobriety to actually figure out where it had originated from.
Can I interrupt you for a second? And I want to go back. Is that because everything was quiet and there were no distractions that you were able to dive in?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. No, sorry, you can go back.
No worries at all. So I had what I would always describe as a very charmed, youthful existence. I did well in school. I had friends. There was nothing really that would be a shining example of. I had both parents. There's no possible reason that you would expect, given all the check marks, that I would end up an alcoholic drug addict. But that's what happened to me. So as I entered college, I started having some very large manias that I didn't quite understand, where I would be up for 3 to 5 days at a time and unable to sleep and my mind racing. And I was diagnosed at that point as being bipolar. And I immediately dismissed this. I said, there's nothing wrong with me. Of course, that's what you do when you're young and dumb, right? So I did find, however, that alcohol was this amazing lubricant that would allow me to continue to function as a bipolar and depressed individual. And that's what I would lean into heavily for years to come. When I was successful, I had several businesses that I started and, I had failures as well. But for the most part, I was a successful entrepreneur. I found myself in Los Angeles representing talent in the early aughts and was out there for several years. And that's when we added the drug element to things. And at first, it just started with I was just working so much. And it's very easy to get caught up and to begin drinking almost all day. You'd go out to breakfast with a client, you'd have a mimosa, and then you'd have a drink at lunch, and then you'd have a drink in a meeting in the afternoon. And by the time that you hit 6-7 o'clock at night and you're going out to some event, you're already drunk, and then trying to push through and do some work when you're done with your day. And one of my clients said, here, this will help you out. And that's when cocaine started becoming part of this mix. And still, I was functional. Very few people knew that I was really struggling with depression and that I was...
Isn't that also part of the problem, is that one doesn't see it as a problem because you're still functioning in your life. You're still doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing. You're showing up.
Yeah, that's the reason it was hidden. It was a hidden problem. And as I'm getting worse, as things are really challenging more and more, you're just glossing over your real true struggle and challenge. I was in increasing amount of pain inside because I was putting on a thicker and thicker mask to the world, trying to convince not only the world, but myself that everything was okay, that I was fine, that nothing needed to be looked at. And I most certainly could hold this this frame and this image of myself up to the world, and no one would ever know. But you can only do that so long. And then the wheels start coming off in small ways. I think the first way for me that things started falling apart is that I wasn't always as punctual to events as I had been. And I started missing deadlines when it came to work-related things. And if anyone confronted me on it, I just said, well, I've been there 99% of the time for you. Why are you getting all over me about this? And I would become hostile with people about it. Certainly, I wasn't the problem. It was their problem that they weren't giving me enough grace in whatever was going on with me, which was very selfish, because really what was happening was I was out of control. At this point, I was drinking usually about a handle of Jack Daniels a day.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was intense, and I was always drunk. I think from about some point in 2010, I got drunk one day, and I was drunk until I became sober in 2016.
Goodness.
I don't think that there was hardly a moment in that time period where I wasn't always drunk. I would get up in the middle of the night and I would take a shot. That was my go-to. If I woke up and needed to go to the bathroom, that also required that I would take a pull off of a bottle of some liquor. It was sad. I was married at this time. And so in 2012, I saw the kind of handwriting on the wall that I was going to collapse. And so I filed for divorce, and she got out of the big challenge that was becoming my death spiral, so to speak. And I'm glad and happy that happened, because it spared her so much of the pain and the trauma that I experienced. She was able to exit that situation. So in 2014, shortly before things just completely collapsed, at this point, my business is about out of business. At the last minute, I sell it to another company and went to work for them as a consultant. But that just equaled, I got to play all the time. And occasionally I'd show up at the office drunk. And then finally they barred me from coming to the office. So, you can't come in anymore, but we'll still pay you. That's what it became. And I'm like, that didn't make me feel any better. As a matter of fact, it made me more depressed and drink more. But in March of 2014, some friends of mine wanted to take a trip. We went to Florida. And on the beach in Florida, I met randomly this young lady, Samantha Thomas. And for some reason, she's like, you're better than this. Why are you drunk? What are you doing with your life? And she was 20 years my junior. So I'm like, what are you talking to me like this for? But for some reason, I listened, and it wasn't a listening enough that I did something about it right away. But the bond became so great so quickly that when I became homeless in December of that year, she stuck by me, and she continued to work with me to find my way out of this new tragedy I was in. Now, we were separated by substantial distance. She was going to college in Alabama, and I was in Kansas City. So there's space. And then I lost my phone, basically, because I couldn't afford it. So we started writing letters, and that really pulled me through and caused me to do that deep reflection. When you had no outward stimulus except these limited interactions that you had with people, and you have nothing but time, something that we should really cherish. Any time that you have alone with yourself should really be cherished, I think, because it allowed me to start digging within myself and to really, push around and figure out where things should be. But eventually I kind of got myself into a situation where I ended up in the hospital in August of 2015, and I had multiple seizures, and ultimately I was dead for a little over 6 minutes. And luckily they revived me, and it still wasn't quite enough to get me over the edge. You'd think that would be, but 3 weeks later, after I got discharged out of the hospital, I was drunk again. And it kind of followed that. I still hadn't quite figured things out. And I end up in rehab. And this is where that deep dive actually happened, is that my counselor in rehab asked me this question, or actually made a statement, is, I think that you have a mask of pleasing other people on that is so heavy that you haven't been able to take it off. And I want to know why you're wearing that mask. And I was like, I'm not a people pleaser. I was, but I never thought of myself as one. And so in doing that exercise, it took me back to when I was 8 years old. And this is when I discovered that I had this hidden trauma I didn't know that I had. So my mom and my father had separated before I was born. And then my mom remarried when I was 3. And so I ended up in this situation where I didn't know anyone but this guy who would become my dad. And when I was 8 years old, we ended up in an adoption situation. And there was something that was said at the courthouse by my mom that stuck with me that I had hid and pushed down for so long. And that was, my father didn't show up to the adoption hearing. So dad won by default. But mom says, well, of course he didn't show up. No one really wanted him anyway. And that's a stinging thing to hear. Your own mother say that nobody really wanted you. And that was the item. And once I recognized that that was the piece of trauma that I had been covering up and working through for, almost 32 years of my life, that was incredible, because then I could pull everything back, and I could see how my life had all related to this fear of being discarded. And I started looking then at all of my relationships, from friendships to, romantic relationships. They all were in this constant fear that the person was going to leave me, that I wasn't worth or worthy of their attention, of their affection. And when you live like that, it is almost impossible to have a good bond with anyone. And it carried over into my business life as well, because you would meet a client, you'd start working with them, things seem great. Then if they didn't call you back, you'd be like, ooh, I wonder what I did wrong. You're in this constant state of fear, But once I figured out how to rewire myself, life has been pretty awesome since March 23rd of 2016, when I stood up sober.
That's amazing. I mean, wow, what a journey. I have this conversation with a friend all the time. It's like our life is continuously giving us things, experiences to heal the root of our trauma. And that's exactly what you did. You went and healed that root, like everything, and life's never been the same since. So
it's so awesome since. It really is.
So you help people to experience the good parts of what you experience, to taking them out of that darkness. So how is your method different to, let's say, AA or like other things out there? Because I don't think AA is for everybody.
I don't either. The way that my method came about was from going to AA and realizing, this is it. What are we doing? And I felt like I was constantly talking about what was in the rearview mirror, which in some ways was depressing. I don't want to think about that. And at the same time, it was kind of tempting and exciting, because when I start telling my stories in AA, I'm like, man, that wasn't that bad. Maybe I could go do that, and you don't want to have those types of thoughts. And so I realized that this was not a good situation. I needed to figure something out for myself. And so I started looking and thinking about some of the things that Samantha had talked to me about in letters, and the questions that she'd asked me, and realized that a lot of this was like ground in Stoic philosophy and really taking that inward look. And then I started thinking about, well, am I as good as I want to be right now? I'm sober, but is this it? What more is there for me? And that's when I had the craziest idea ever. I was like, you know what? I wonder if I could treat my own psyche like the Deming cycle they use in manufacturing, where it's a continuous improvement cycle. So I can just like look at my mind and go, I'm going to improve this. And then we're going to measure and see how we're doing. And then we're going to improve something else. So that's how the craziness of sober came up. And sober stands for Stoic, Observe, Behavior, Execute, and Restore. And it begins by looking at like one thing, one item in your life, and we're going to take this off into like little small improvements to gradually improve ourselves. So
can you give an example of that?
I'm going to give an example. Yes. One of the easiest examples that I can give, and I always recommend that, use Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, because it's free. You can see a copy of this anywhere. And the great thing about Marcus Aurelius is that you're looking into the mind of the most powerful man alive 2,000 years ago. And yet he was sitting there trying to improve himself. And I think that's what's so amazing about his writing. I think most everyone has heard Marcus's quote, the obstacle is the way. Whatever the hardest thing that is in front of you is the way to your success. So if you confront that thing and you take it head on, you will succeed. If you try to continue to deviate around it, you won't. So if we using that as an example, let's say that the hardest thing that I have to deal with is I have a nagging mother-in-law. I didn't have a nagging mother-in-law when I was married, but we're going to use this as an example because it's relatable, I think. And every time that I see her in person, I'm fine. I can laugh with her. It can be a little sarcastic joke, and I don't want to drink. I'm totally okay. But when she calls on the phone, she starts laying into me. I'm like, I just can't take it. So that's my challenge. How am I going to fix that? And that's where we go into the observe step. And I kind of just touched on what the observe step is. You're looking at overall, what's your behavior in a particular situation and how are you dealing with it right now? And how did the stimuli impact your drive to drink or use drugs? So once you have identified that, like, how might you alleviate it? And I just kind of laid out that example as well by noticing the fact that I am less likely to lean into substances when I am in person with her. Whereas when I'm on the phone or text or anything else, I'm like, I just want to, I can't take it. So that behavior remapping is a look at, okay, from now on, what I think I'll do is if she happens to call me, I'll say, I'm going to see you on Sunday. How about we talk about that then? And then it diffuses okay, that sounds like it might work. So now we go into the execute step. This is testing. This is where you're going to literally, the next time this happens, you already know the behavior you're going to do. So your mother-in-law calls, you answer, she starts asking you all sorts of stuff. You're getting irritated right away. So, you know what, Mom, how about we talk about this on Sunday when we come over to dinner? And she goes, sure, that'd be great. Okay, great. You hang up the phone. How do you feel? Oh, I feel okay. Okay, I'm just going to continue about my day. That's a win. Now you know how you're going to deal with this situation. Now, if for some reason it didn't work quite the way you wanted, then you would go back to the observe step and really dig into what didn't work, what worked, at what point during the phone call did you feel like you tipped over? And so you make some adjustments and then you go back and you test again. But if it worked, then you've corrected one huge thing in your life that is causing you to use substances. You move on to the restore step. And in this, you identify, are there any other individuals that fit this pattern that I just remapped for my mother-in-law? Oh, I can think of 3 people I deal with that is very similar. So I rethink those types of interactions. And once I've done that, I go back to step S and I confront something new that I want to improve upon myself. I'm in my 30th pass of my own program at the moment. And one of the great things about it, because there's journaling that's involved in all of this, is that I have the ability to look back at me 9 years ago when I was just beginning and see how far I've come. And you start getting into smaller and smaller things that you want to perfect about yourself, the longer you go about it. And it truly is a self-improvement program. You don't have to be someone who is struggling with a substance to utilize this. I've actually worked with people that are using it for all sorts of things. Somebody used it to stop chewing their nails and wrote me an email. And that is I'm like, okay, that's great. Okay.
That is great. So yes, I was going to actually ask you, so how do people use this if they don't have a substance abuse? Could they use it just for self-improvement, just for inner healing?
Absolutely. And so in some ways, I feel like as more people enter my life and tell me the ways that they're utilizing the sober method, I'm like, it's almost a misnomer. It's such a powerful tool because you're sitting with yourself and allowing yourself to be vulnerable to yourself and find these little things that are really challenging you. And you may not even realize that you're challenged until you take the time to reflect upon the things that bother you in your life. And I really believe that most people glaze over a good portion of things that just kind of mildly irritate them and just continue, it's fine. But those things add up. It's like putting pennies in a penny bank. It's like over time, those things are going to add up and they might tip over into other behavior. So it's better just to confront them and look at them now and figure out how you can improve yourself.
So I want to touch on something that I think about, because I have some people in my life who I think are like this, who drink let's say, enough, and they function well enough, and their lives are good. Like there's nothing to complain about, but they're probably having like their first drink like before lunch, and they don't think that's a problem. And maybe it's not for them. I mean, everybody's different. But, or maybe a person is contemplating that maybe that's not something they should be doing every day. How do you address those people who are kind of like on the fringes, as their life hasn't fallen apart? They're in like the normal range, but it's probably leaning towards unhealthy or undesirable. But their life is good. It's holding together. It's like yours was in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like me in 2010, where nobody on earth would have said, "Oh, this guy's in trouble." I was in deep trouble already in 2010. And I think that two things. First, these are the most difficult cases to work with. They have to realize it. I think that everyone must realize that they have some challenge before they get there. Now, if you're concerned and you're an outsider and you're trying to convince somebody that you might have a problem and they don't think they have a problem. One of the ways that I often will fish for these problems is to ask them if there's anything that they've been trying to get accomplished but haven't got done. And a lot of people that are on this bubble will immediately say, yeah, I've been trying to do this, but I just never feel like it. And so if you lean into this, they start reflecting upon, this might be better if I wasn't doing this. And it oftentimes will open that door enough for them to reflect and say, maybe I do have a problem. And then come back to it again in a couple of weeks and ask him another question. Hey, remember when you were telling me how you wanted to go out and start working on the fence in the backyard that you've been putting off forever? And he's like, how's that coming along? Yeah, I do need to do that. And so then they'll start thinking about that. And then they will oftentimes come back to me and be like, you know what? I need to do something. I'm like, okay. And then that starts the deeper conversation to have them begin reflecting on what's really challenging their ability to, not lean into that drink every day. What are they thinking about that first time that they have that drink? A lot of people, it's become habit. So this requires an immense amount of reflection because they've forgotten why they need that drink every day. At this point, it might be physiological. They may actually need it or they're going to start tremoring. And that's what's become scary, is if somebody's already at that point. But those questions will lead someone into recognizing, I need to do something. And then they start to come back and ask, oh, well, what were you thinking? You don't want to give someone too much at once because it will turn them away.
And what about for the person who is like, they don't think that they have like they're in the social bucket,
Mm-hmm.
but they want to stop. So it's not so much a habit, it's not a daily thing, but they tend to not do that or not stick to it. Like they'll do it maybe for a couple of weeks and then they take it up again and they're like, yeah, no, I want to stop because I feel like it's better for my body. Or how do you deal with people like that?
Those people are a lot easier, actually, because they already know. I mean, this plays into, most often, especially in those social lubricant type of situations, there's something underlying. They're shy about something. They don't feel confident enough to be in a room like alone for a moment. Social gatherings can be really challenging for people, especially if they're introverted or even just a tad shy, and they feel like this takes them over the line. So in those cases, it's like, what could you do that would make you feel more confident when you walked into a room full of strangers? And then dig into that. And then you realize that there might be 2 or 3 things that could make them feel more secure in who they are. Generally speaking, those people are just more self-conscious about how other people perceive them and look at them and if you can teach them that most people really aren't paying as much attention to you as you think that they are. Because almost always people have so much going on in their own head and they're thinking about something that's going on that's 10 minutes from now. They're not even listening to you half the time. And if you really don't believe me, try it out in the next time. Say something, ask somebody a question after you've just talked with them for 2 minutes. And I'll bet you half the time they say, what were you saying? Because it's really quite, in a way, it's sad. It really is sad, because that just means that we're not present in the moment. And that's something that I found that improved so much for me once I became sober, is being present in conversations and not thinking about what I was going to say next or worried about what someone thought of me, but instead just like really pay attention to the words and then try to pause a moment and then reply. And even taking those reflections just for a moment when you're talking to somebody can really ease your need to think, oh, I need to have a drink so I know what to say next.
So besides yourself, what has been your most successful story?
Wow. Well, I got to be careful to make sure that I don't say anything that could possibly let out who this is. But I had somebody who is a professional, and that was struggling in such a way that, well, I think I can say this. This person was a lawyer, and this is a profession where it's not uncommon in law firms to have alcohol flowing during the day in somebody's office. It's actually, I'd say it's quite common. And it's also, I think, something that can be hidden. But he realized he was in the middle of a very important case that was going to go to trial, and that if he didn't get his life under control, he was going to lose it, and then he was going to no longer be a partner in his firm. And he wanted help right away, but he wanted it quietly. And that's one of the great things about working with someone who's a coach and working on a method that is not there in the medical field, is because you can actually work through these things without alerting everybody about the fact that you have a challenge. And that's one thing I faced as well, being a business owner. Who was I going to go to? All of my friends were business owners, and a lot of them I did business with. And so I had no one that I could turn to. And so I saw a lot of myself in him. And he has been sober now for, well, he's coming up on 5 years.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's totally changed his life. He told me recently, I talked with him about 6 months ago, and he told me that he feels so much more present for his kids now, and that he feels like he's become such a better person for those around him. And those are the things that really get me more than the sobriety, because who you become, your aura that you have about you when you're sober is just so much more improved. That's what really gets me. That's what makes me smile.
It's beautiful. For myself personally, I chose not to drink for other reasons, but like for spiritual reasons. And I noticed such a difference in my brain function and my health and all of these things that was just like, why didn't I do this so long ago? Even before that, I wasn't. I could have a glass of wine maybe once or twice in the week. But even just that little bit may impact your health. So I always am so at awe of people who were completely dependent on this, and they take such action to transform their lives, and it's not something that they partake in anymore, whatever it is, whether it's drugs or alcohol, and I'm sure there's a long list of things that people do, but it's amazing. And for me, it's also another example of how you can change. You can change, and whatever it is, whether it's trauma or addiction or something a habit you don't like, it is possible. It doesn't have to be the depths of despair and that real rock bottom for you to really make a change.
I think that comes from your own mindset. If you believe in your ability to be malleable, we all are. We all can be reformed and reshaped. And what you said about the clarity that you get by being sober, just from those couple of drinks a week, and a lot of just mood change. Alcohol is poison at the end of the day. And if you look at it that way, would you drink poison? No. Okay, well then why are you putting alcohol in? You know what I mean? I say that to people sometimes, and I get a laugh, like you were laughing, but it's true.
It's true. It's ethanol. It's like
exactly. It's like, wait, you want to go drink some gasoline? I mean, you're just one step away from there. So I think that the most important thing is to believe in one's future. And if you don't look back, you can learn from the past, but you shouldn't mull over it, because it's yesterday. You can't change yesterday. You can only learn from it. And one thing I did when I was a drunk is that I would always look at the background and always be like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have said that. Oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Oh man, things would be better if I wouldn't have, gone and done that. Well, sure. what are you going to do next time? I never had those conversations in my head with myself. It's like, what? Okay, great. You messed up. How are you going to do it better next time? Now that lays into greater confidence within yourself as well, because I know I'm going to make mistakes and I own that up front. So if you can just live your life and realize I might mess up, but I'll learn from it. And I've had some mess ups in personal relationships over the last few years where I've been, what was I thinking? I never should have said that. Okay, well, I won't say that again to anybody. You know what I mean? But in those cases, I've managed to actually course correct and say what I said was wrong. I shouldn't have thought it that way. And this is what I was trying to say in my head. It came out wrong. Can we find and restored a relationship? Now, old drunk me wouldn't have even had the ability to think through what I did wrong. I just would have been like, oh, that person's a jerk, and you just discard people out of hand. So sobriety's amazing. It really is.
So if someone is feeling inspired and they want to take their first step or the next step in their healing journey, what would you recommend that they do right now?
I think your first step is to put down your phone, turn off the TV, go sit someplace in quiet for 10 minutes, heck, 5 minutes, because that'll be a challenge for most everyone. And I want you to think about one thing that you could do today that would improve your life. It can be a small thing, just one thing. And then I want you to get up and I want you to do that one thing. And that's step one. You have the ability to make change. And then tomorrow, keep that, hold that. Whatever you change today, hold it tomorrow. And then the day after that, think about something else. But that quiet, alone separation is the most important thing that I could recommend that someone do.
So Massimo, is there anything that you want to share that I haven't asked you about?
I don't really have anything that sticks out. I just want to make sure that everyone knows where they can find me, sobermethod.com, or I'm sure you'll put this in show notes. I've got 2 books available. One's a memoir. The second one is the Sober Method, pocketbook, so to speak, that'll take you through everything. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today, Natasha, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to your listeners.
Thank you for being with us. I appreciate it.